Sometimes life deceives us with dazzling appearances that are, in truth, empty. That's exactly what happened to Ethan Walker, a charming billionaire who seemed to have it all, yet was trapped in a dilemma money could never solve, discovering whether he was truly loved. The story you're about to witness goes beyond wealth and status. It's about masks falling, painful choices, and the discovery of what really matters when everything else is stripped away. If you also believe that powerful stories can teach lessons for real life, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss a single detail of this surprising narrative, filled with twists, emotion, and insights that will hold your attention until the very last moment. Ethan Walker was the kind of man who seemed to carry an invisible magnet. Wherever he went, eyes followed him as if it were impossible to ignore his presence. A young billionaire, owner of a sharp vision for business, he walked with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he wanted. But the curious thing was that behind the glow of his fortune, there was a silence no one could see, the doubt whether all that power really meant happiness. Many dreamed of being in his shoes, but few understood the weight of living under the spotlight. After all, how could he trust anyone when people seemed attracted to his last name before even knowing his heart? It's like that childhood friendship. You only know it's real when the friend stays by your side even after you lose your most expensive toy. Surrounded by flatterers, Ethan rarely found that kind of authenticity. Isabella Reed appeared to be the perfect fiancée. Beautiful, elegant, strategic, she seemed to have stepped out of a modern fairy tale. Society saw them as the dream union, the couple who graced magazine covers and set trends. But Ethan's mind, always sharp in business, also knew how to detect when something wasn't genuine. And there were moments when Isabella's smile seemed far too rehearsed. Those who have truly loved know this. It's not the expensive gift, nor the fancy dinner that reveals love, but the unexpected, simple, unpretentious gesture. Ethan, despite all his wealth, longed for that touch of sincerity. He wanted something like that mother's hug that cures even a fever, or the knowing glance of a friend in the midst of chaos. Yet among jewels and contracts, such things seemed rarer and rarer. On the outside, Ethan was seen as charming, almost unreachable. But inside he lived like a castaway stranded on a golden island. Haven't you noticed how some people seem to have everything and yet still carry a void? It's like buying the latest smartphone and realizing that without internet, it's practically useless. Ethan's heart worked the same way. Without true love, his empire was nothing but a facade. Curiously, society itself reinforced that role of perfection. Columnists spoke of the love story of the century. Brands fought for the couple's presence at events, and photographers battled for the best shot. But what no one saw was Ethan's silence when he laid his head on the pillow, asking himself, does she love me? Or does she love what I represent? That question gnawed at him more than any financial loss ever could. The fear of losing money he knew how to handle, but the fear of giving his heart to someone who didn't truly want him was devastating. Think about it, you can lose a house and build another, you can lose a car and buy another. But when the heart is broken by interest, even breathing feels like an effort. Ethan lived on that edge. And it was precisely on that edge between doubt and hope that his story began to take an unexpected turn. Because when the restless mind of a powerful man decides to seek answers, nothing can stop him from going to the end. And in that instant, a risky plan began to form in his head. A plan that would change not only his life, but also reveal the true meaning of love. Ethan carried within him a desire that contrasted with the image the world had of him. While society saw only wealth and power, his heart longed for simplicity. A home filled with laughter echoing through the halls, children running through the garden, and a partner who loved him for the man he was, not for the empire he commanded. Isabella always said she agreed with Ethan's dreams. Her words were sweet, always accompanied by flawless smiles as if she were reciting rehearsed lines. Yet there was something in her gaze that betrayed a lack of authenticity. It was like watching a play where every line sounded far too perfect to be real. Ethan was used to business where everything was calculated, contracts signed, and profits expected. But when it came to love, he longed for spontaneity. He didn't want a life of appearances, but true moments. A coffee shared in silence, a sincere embrace after a difficult day, or even an argument that revealed vulnerability. For him, that was eternity. Meanwhile, Isabella seemed to understand each expectation only on the surface. She repeated promises but never allowed genuine emotions to show. Ethan observed quietly the details. The rehearsed way she touched his hand in public, The calculated smile before the cameras, the absence of sparkle in her eyes when they were alone. The distance between what Ethan dreamed of and what Isabella offered only grew with time. It was like looking at a beautiful painting, only to realize the colors faded upon closer inspection. He wondered if he was building his life beside someone who truly loved him, or simply beside a character well trained to captivate an audience. This contrast left Ethan restless. As a man who had always known how to identify risks in the financial market, he also recognized the risk in his relationship. The problem was that this wasn't about stocks or investments that could be recovered. When the heart is tested, the losses can be irreparable, and that possibility consumed him each day, feeding a shadow that grew in silence. Even so, Ethan insisted on believing that love could blossom there. Perhaps it was naivety, perhaps just fear of loneliness, but deep within, there was still hope that Isabella could meet his need for something real. After all, even the most powerful have the right to dream, and it was precisely this dream, this mixture of faith and doubt, that led him to take a bold step. Ethan knew he could not live forever with uncertainty gnawing at his soul. He needed to discover the truth, even if the price was high. And so he began to draw in his mind a risky plan, something that would test not only Isabella, but also the very limits of destiny. Ethan could no longer bear living with doubt hammering in his mind. He knew he couldn't keep giving his heart to a love that might only be a facade. It was like standing before an unfair scale, where the weight of uncertainty always seemed heavier than hope. And for a man used to making calculated decisions, doing nothing was the greatest risk of all. It was in this state of restlessness that the daring idea was born. It wouldn't be a simple test, but a strategy capable of revealing hidden truths. Ethan devised something many would call madness: to simulate an accident and see who would remain by his side when there was no wealth, no parties, no spotlight. He wanted to discover who would love him in the silence of vulnerability. The plan required courage and coldness. It was as if he were setting up a chess game where every move had to be thought through in advance. If it went wrong, he would not only expose his personal life but also shake his reputation. Yet for Ethan, the pain of living deceived was far more unbearable than any newspaper headline. The news spread quickly. The billionaire had suffered a serious car accident and was now quadriplegic. The entire country was in shock. Social media exploded with messages of support, while newspapers printed his image in bold headlines. Suddenly, all his strength and power seemed reduced to a hospital bed. Isabella was the first to appear before the cameras, crying and declaring unconditional support. Her words were applauded, and society sighed for the devoted fiancé. But deep down, Ethan knew the real test wasn't in front of the flashes. It was in the everyday moments, when the curtains closed and only the raw truth of two hearts remained. The first days were filled with silence and observation. Ethan remained motionless, playing the role of a man trapped in his own body. At the same time, he watched Isabella's every gesture. It was like watching a film where the main actor pretends to be absent just to see who truly cares about his presence. As time passed, the mask began to crack. Isabella's visits grew shorter, her hugs colder, her kisses mechanical. What once looked like devotion started to feel like obligation. Ethan felt the weight of truth approaching, like a storm about to break. The risky plan was only at its beginning, but it was already revealing more than he could have imagined. And in this setting of uncertainty and pain, a new player entered the scene, someone far from the spotlight and society's whispers. An unexpected presence who, without realizing it, would begin to change the course of the story. Ethan didn't know it yet, but true love was about to reveal itself in a way he could never have foreseen. At first, Isabella seemed like the perfect fiancée. She cried before the cameras, gave emotional speeches, and received warm applause from the press. The headlines praised her as an example of dedication and unconditional love. To those watching from the outside, she was the picture of loyalty. But behind the curtain of flashes, the truth was far less glamorous. When the cameras went dark, Isabella revealed another face. Her visits to the hospital became increasingly sporadic, almost obligatory. Her hugs were cold, her kisses hollow, and her presence felt more like a duty than an act of affection. Ethan, motionless in his performance, observed everything in silence. collecting each detail as proof of what he feared most. It was as if she had memorized a role for the stage, but couldn't sustain the act once the audience was gone. Isabella knew how to move crowds, but in private she failed to touch a single heart. Day by day, her mask began to crack, revealing the indifference hidden behind her rehearsed smiles. Ethan saw with growing clarity that what he most feared was right before him. Ethan did not need public declarations, but true gestures. A simple touch of the hand, a word of comfort, a look that said, "I'm here." None of this came from Isabella. The emptiness around him was so great that the hospital, full of people, felt deserted when she was there. That absence of sincerity weighed more heavily than any physical pain ever could. Society continued to believe the deception. Television shows praised Isabella as the fiancée everyone would want by their side in difficult times. But Ethan knew that the truth could not be sustained by spotlights forever. Time, patient and relentless, was beginning to reveal what lay hidden between the lines of the spectacle. The contrast between appearance and reality was brutal. Isabella was a star shining in front of the cameras, but her light did not illuminate Ethan's heart. He, who so longed for authenticity, saw only distorted reflections of a love that had never existed. It was like drinking salt water. The thirst seemed quenched for a moment, but soon returned even stronger. Ethan realized that his act not only revealed who Isabella truly was, but also tested himself. He discovered how much he could endure carrying a relationship built on appearances. The price of doubt was becoming unbearable, and with each cold visit, the risky plan grew sharper. There would be no room left for illusions. In this environment of lies and disappointments, destiny was preparing an unexpected encounter. While Isabella drifted away, another figure would emerge to fill the void, bringing not rehearsed promises but small gestures of truth. Ethan did not yet know it, but he was about to find something that would change the course of his life forever. As Isabella drifted away, life found an unexpected way to fill the void. Emily appeared as a discreet presence, without spotlights, without rehearsed speeches, only with simple gestures. She promised nothing, yet delivered everything in small details. She was like a gentle breeze entering a stifling room, bringing freshness without asking permission. Emily cared for Ethan with natural ease. There was no rush, no sense of obligation in her movements. She prepared meals with affection, read stories to distract him, laughed at his jokes, even the silly ones, and accompanied him to the garden to feel the sun on his face. What once seemed ordinary gained the weight of eternity in the heart of someone starving for truth. Ethan, who had always lived surrounded by excess, began to value the simplicity Emily brought. It wasn't about expensive gifts, but about the attention in her gaze, the patience in listening, the lightness in sharing silence. Each gesture of hers contrasted with Isabella's cold visits, revealing that true love does not need a stage to exist. Over time, Ethan realized that his heart warmed in Emily's presence. He felt comfort, safety, and tenderness, sensations that had nothing to do with power or wealth. It was as if, for the first time, someone could see the man behind the billionaire. Emily did not see titles, she did not see fame, only a person who needed to be cared for. Their bond blossomed slowly. There were no grand declarations, but companionship in small acts. Emily laughed at his comments, held his hand when the silence grew heavy, and reminded him that there was still beauty in simple things. Ethan felt as if he were being reborn, as if he had found a piece of life he thought was lost. Each encounter strengthened Ethan's certainty that something new was emerging. His heart, once hardened by mistrust, began to open. It was like watching a garden bloom after a harsh winter, unexpected, beautiful, and full of hope. Emily effortlessly was becoming what he had always sought but never knew where to find. Her presence made him question everything he believed about love. Perhaps it wasn't about fancy dinners or magazine covers, but about being with someone who truly mattered. Ethan discovered that happiness could live in shared laughter, in a simple cup of coffee in the garden, in a sincere glance that spoke louder than 1,000 words. And it was in this sweetness that Ethan found the strength to continue his plan. Now, however, there was a new piece in the game: Emily. She didn't know it yet, but she already held an enormous place in his life. And this would change not only the way he saw Isabella, but also how he would come to see himself and his future. 15 days had passed since the accident, Time seemed to drag slowly, as if every hour were a test of Ethan's patience and faith. The silence of the hospital corridors carried the weight of doubt, but also the expectation that the truth was drawing closer. He knew he couldn't sustain the charade forever. Isabella returned for a rare visit. Before entering the room, she spoke with Ethan's private doctor, who gave her a harsh piece of news. The condition was irreversible. To her, it sounded like a prison sentence tied to a man who, in her eyes, had nothing left to offer but limitations. The decision was already forming in her mind. When she entered the room, Isabella maintained her facade of a smile. Ethan, still playing the role of paralysis, decided to take a bold step within his own plan. He asked to make their engagement official with a special dinner, believing that moment would reveal what was hidden. It was his chance to hear from her lips what he feared the most. The answer came in the form of a cruel laugh. Isabella chuckled, unmoved by his fragility. "You need a babysitter, Ethan, not a wife, and I wasn't born to be a man's babysitter." Her words cut through the air like a sharp blade. What had once been suspicion now turned into painful certainty. At that moment, Emily entered the room carrying a tray of coffee. The contrast between the two was striking. While Isabella displayed contempt, Emily showed genuine care and attention. Isabella mocked her as well, as if her presence were insignificant, and left without looking back. The emptiness she left behind was filled by the quiet tenderness of someone who truly cared. Ethan felt his heart shatter, not from losing Isabella, but from the confirmation that everything he feared was real. Her cruelty exposed not only the absence of love, but the lack of humanity. It was a blow he himself had prepared, but one that still hurt as if it had been unexpected. Emily, in contrast, didn't try to fill the silence with grand words. She simply set the tray aside, sat close to him, and held his hand. That simple gesture brought more warmth than all of Isabella's public promises combined. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt he was not alone. The truth, as cruel as it was, opened the door to something new. His wounded heart found solace in Emily's presence. It was the beginning of a transformation, a turning point where pain also revealed the possibility of hope. Destiny was starting to align pieces that would change the course of everything. After Isabella's departure, silence took over the room. The air felt heavy, weighed down by the cruel words that still echoed in Ethan's mind. He was wounded, but not in his body, rather in his soul, by the confirmation that the love he thought he had was nothing but an illusion. It was as if everything he had invested in had collapsed at once. Emily, who had witnessed the scene, needed no explanations. She set the tray aside and slowly moved closer, sitting beside Ethan. There were no rehearsed speeches or grand promises, only the genuine presence of someone who cares. Sometimes comfort doesn't come from words, but from the simple act of being there in a moment of pain. She held his hand firmly and said softly, "You don't need her." "Ethan, I'm here." That short and gentle phrase carried more weight than any of Isabella's public declarations. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt true human warmth, something that pierced through his wall of distrust. Ethan looked at Emily with tearful eyes. The contrast between the two women was undeniable. While Isabella had hurt him with indifference, Emily healed him with tenderness. The difference wasn't about wealth or beauty, but essence. The heart recognizes when it's being cared for with sincerity, and his was beginning to beat in a new way. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Where the cold of loneliness once reigned, now burned the spark of new hope. Ethan felt he didn't need to prove anything to Emily. She didn't see him as a powerful billionaire, nor as a man bound to a wheelchair, but simply as someone worthy of love. That connection grew quietly, naturally, effortlessly. It was as if her words filled the empty spaces Isabella had left behind. Ethan was discovering that comfort could exist even in the darkest moments, as long as someone was there willing to share the weight of pain. Emily was that rare presence. He realized that in the midst of his risky plan, he had found something unexpected. Emily's comfort not only eased his sorrow, but rekindled his hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something he had never truly experienced before. A love without masks, born in the soil of vulnerability. And so, Ethan's heart began to open to a new possibility. Emily didn't know it yet, but she was already becoming the center of the transformation he had long sought. Destiny was preparing the next step, a moment beyond the cold walls of the hospital, where this bond would grow even stronger. Emily believed that healing was not found only in the hospital, but also outside of it. One day, seeing Ethan lost in thought, she suggested a walk in the park. At first, he hesitated, afraid of exposure and curious stares. But her gentle insistence convinced him that life needed to breathe again. On the chosen day, Emily prepared a picnic with everything he loved: fresh fruit, delicate cheeses, and even that childhood sweet that brought back memories. She wanted to show him that small gestures could hold immense power. When they arrived at the park, the soft breeze and birdsong brought a sense of freedom Ethan hadn't felt in a long time. They laughed like children, sharing stories they had never told before. Emily spoke of simple dreams like traveling to lesser-known places or tending to a garden. Ethan, for the first time in weeks, opened his heart about his fears and hopes. There, under the shade of a tree, they discovered that vulnerability could also be a form of strength. At one moment, silence took over. A deep gaze connected them as if words were unnecessary. Emily, on impulse, leaned in and kissed him. She quickly pulled away, apologizing in embarrassment. But before she could step back, Ethan embraced her and said there was nothing wrong, because it was exactly what he wanted. With a firm voice, he revealed the truth. He had never been paralyzed. He explained the plan, the staged accident, his desire to test Isabella, and the fear that haunted him. Emily was in shock, tears streaming down her face as she listened to his confession. The weight of the revelation seemed crushing, yet also liberating. Ethan, his eyes fixed on hers, said he would understand if she chose to walk away. But he added something even greater. He had fallen in love. Emily, though shaken, couldn't deny what she also felt. The pain of the lie was real, but the love that had blossomed was even stronger. She admitted she should hate him for the manipulation, yet she couldn't. What they had lived was authentic, built through simple and genuine moments. Emily realized that even in the midst of a deception, she had found something she had never consciously sought. Someone who saw her completely. There, between laughter, tears, and confessions, a silent promise was born. The park, witness to that moment, became the setting for a new beginning. Ethan and Emily left transformed. He, lighter for revealing his truth. She, stronger for embracing a love that defied even the most improbable circumstances. The news of Ethan's recovery didn't take long to explode. Headlines filled the newspapers. Television shows debated the case, and social media swarmed with theories. Some said it was a miracle. Others speculated about manipulation. His name was everywhere, and with it, Isabella could no longer escape the public's pressure. Feeling her image threatened, Isabella appeared at the mansion. This time, she brought no rehearsed smiles for the cameras, but tears and pleas for forgiveness. She said she still loved him, that she had been confused, that she needed a second chance. Her words, heavy with emotion, tried to rebuild a bridge that had already collapsed. Ethan listened in silence. He knew it wasn't enough to deny or accept right away, because this was not just a personal drama. The whole world was watching. Any move could turn into news, any word into a headline. He had to act with strategy, and he already had the next step in mind. To Isabella's surprise, Ethan invited her to a special dinner at his mansion. He told her it would be an opportunity to start over, to show the world that love could withstand everything. Believing she had regained his forgiveness, she accepted immediately. For the first time in weeks, she seemed hopeful, imagining flashes and applause in her favor. Meanwhile, Emily watched everything with a heavy heart. She didn't question Ethan, but feared he might give in to the pressure and return to Isabella's arms. Yet she had learned to trust. She knew he was no longer the indecisive man of before. There was a firmness in his eyes that promised revelations ahead. The press, curious as ever, quickly caught wind of the dinner. Invitations were distributed, photographers prepared, columnists promised to cover every detail. Society waited eagerly for the reunion of the couple once considered perfect. Little did they know the event was about to turn into a spectacle of raw, unfiltered truth. Isabella, vain and confident, prepared for the big moment. She imagined herself once again the protagonist of a fairy tale, ready to reclaim everything she had lost. As she adjusted her dress in front of the mirror, she failed to realize the story was no longer hers. The stage was set, but the leading role was not hers to play. Ethan, on the other hand, knew that night would change everything. It wouldn't just be an opportunity to close a chapter, but to reveal to the world who truly stood by his side. The dinner would be more than a social gathering. It would be the stage of truth, the moment when masks would fall and authentic feelings would be laid bare. The Walker mansion was dazzling that night. Chandeliers sparkled, tables were richly decorated, and guests eagerly awaited the moment Ethan would speak. The atmosphere exuded luxury, but behind the beauty, tension lingered. Every glance, every flash seemed to carry the expectation of an unprecedented spectacle. Isabella entered with grandeur. She wore a red dress that drew every eye, as if she were the star of a grand production. She smiled for the photographers, greeted the guests, and walked with the confidence of someone who believed she was reclaiming her place. For her, that night would be the new beginning she had longed for. Ethan stepped onto the stage with a firm posture. Applause echoed, and Isabella, smiling, began to walk toward him, as if anticipating the announcement of her victory. But instead of reaching for her hand, he raised his own and asked for silence. The tension grew, and the entire hall fell quiet with expectation. With a serene voice, Ethan spoke of pain, lessons, and true love. He said he had discovered that genuine affection does not live in the spotlight, but in moments of vulnerability, when nothing remains but the heart. Isabella, still confident, continued moving forward, convinced those words were meant for her. Suddenly, the speech took another turn. Ethan revealed that the love that sustained him did not come from where everyone expected. He explained that in his darkest days he found care, tenderness, and truth in someone who never sought attention: Emily. The hall erupted in murmurs, and Isabella stopped, confused midway. Emily, elegant in a blue dress, stood timidly among the guests. Ethan stepped down from the stage, walked to her, and in front of everyone knelt down. He asked for her hand in marriage, calling her his angel and his truth. Tears in Emily's eyes reflected the intensity of the moment as flashes captured every detail. Isabella, shocked, couldn't move. Photographers captured her expression of disbelief, frozen between rage and humiliation. She tried to protest, but Ethan took the microphone again and revealed the entire truth. The accident had been a ruse, a plan to test loyalty. Isabella's mask in front of everyone finally fell. The hall was overtaken by applause, shouts, and emotion. Ethan held Emily's hand and announced the wedding would take place in 2 weeks before all who now witnessed his choice. As Isabella walked away defeated, surrounded by flashes and whispers, Ethan and Emily kissed passionately, celebrating a love born in the shadows but blossomed in the light of truth. 2 weeks later, the big day arrived. The church was decorated with white flowers, and the soft sound of the choir filled the atmosphere with emotion. Guests waited eagerly as the bells announced that the destiny of Ethan and Emily was about to be sealed forever. It was more than a wedding. It was the celebration of truth. When Emily entered through the main doors, everyone stood in applause. Her simple yet elegant dress reflected her essence: beauty without ostentation, tenderness without artifice. Ethan awaited her at the altar, and in his eyes there was no doubt, only the certainty that he had found what he had always sought. Even without knowing it, the moment they exchanged vows was charged with sincerity. There were no rehearsed lines, only words born from the heart. Ethan spoke of hope, of transformation, and of a love that had bloomed from pain. Emily replied through tears, promising not only loyalty but companionship through every season of life. When they said yes, a shower of white petals fell over the couple. They left the church hand in hand, smiling as if carrying an invisible treasure. It wasn't the flashes or the headlines that mattered, but the life that lay before them. The true wealth was there in shared laughter and lived love. Outside, the crowd celebrated. Children threw petals, families clapped, and the sky seemed clearer than ever. Ethan looked at Emily and whispered words only she could hear. It was an intimate secret, but one that became an eternal promise. Emily smiled and answered only with her gaze. Between them, no further words were needed. Every gesture, every touch said more than any speech. It was the certainty that love did not need adornments to be grand. It only needed to be true. As they walked toward the car that would take them into the future, Ethan felt a peace he had never known. The weight of doubt had dissipated, replaced by fulfillment. He finally understood that the greatest triumph was not in power, but in a heart that finds its home. And so, under a shower of applause and petals, Ethan and Emily moved forward together. The world could continue to watch, but the story now belonged solely to them. And in the silence of that moment, they both knew they had discovered true wealth, and nothing could take it from their hands. So, after diving into this story full of twists and turns, what have you learned about true love? Have you ever lived through moments when the masks fell and you discovered who was really by your side? Think about it. Sometimes it's in the hardest moments that we find the people who truly matter. Now I want to hear from you. Write in the comments which city you're watching from, because it will be amazing to see how far this message has reached. And of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. I promise each one will inspire you and surprise you even more.